Welcome to Spirit Cafe. I'm your host, Tamara Zoner, and I can't wait to talk to our guest today. Her name is Leslie Holthoff, and she is a divorce coach and co-parenting coach and a doctoral student. And she was a teen mom. There's so much here. I'm not going to read out her whole entire bio. I will let her tell us about her, but you got to know, as a mother and a divorced woman myself, that I am digging into Leslie's thoughts about co-parenting and divorce and all of the challenges that come with it. So are you ready? Join me and Leslie. Hi, I'm Tamara Zoner. Welcome to Spirit Cafe. Come in, sit down, and grab a cup of love. Welcome to Spirit Cafe, Leslie Holthoff. Did I say your name correctly?
You did. And yeah, that was great.
Awesome. All right. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You can either give us your, canned bio, or you can tell us the real deal, your choice, but tell us who you are.
Where to start? So I am a divorce and co-parenting coach. I've been doing that for a couple of years now. I am working on my PhD, writing my dissertation on co-parenting, specifically on joint shared custody. I have a background in lots of different things. I started off in IT. I went into sales. I did grant writing, grant management. I was the CEO of a nonprofit. I've done just all kinds of things. And here, right before coaching, I have been flipping houses in real estate for probably the past 6 years. So anyways, I do all of those things. I am married, second marriage. I have 2 kids who are kids, but they're also adults. So I have my kids this year will be 21 and 29. So I am in a new phase of co-parenting, my favorite so far, for sure. But I guess that's about it. Is there anything else I forgot to cover?
I mean, we'll get to it, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a lot. I have a lot of different things.
Yeah, you do a lot of different things. That's amazing. So your oldest is 29. So he's technically an adult, the brain's all fully developed and he's there. But you had that one when you were just a baby.
I was 15 when I found out I was pregnant, which was a humongous surprise. And I was just barely 16 when I had him. And so that in itself, that situation, I would say, really laid out the rest of my life and has had an impact on every decision that I've made since then.
Mm-hmm. And so how did it inform the rest of your life so far?
Well, it's funny. When you're 15 years old, you really cannot conceptualize what full adulthood is like, right? When you're 15, you cannot comprehend what it's like to be 40, or really even what it would be, say, to be married and have kids. We'll call it the traditional way.
Mm-hmm.
So the decisions I thought that I was making when I was 15 felt very noble. Like, you know what? I made this mistake. I'm going to, this is my responsibility. I'm going to take responsibility here, and I'm going to have this kid, and I'm going to do the best I can. And, all of a sudden I'm 15 and I'm like, wow, I've got to pick a religion to teach this kid. And I've got to figure out how to get through high school. And then I have to decide how I feel about college and just all of these things. And an unintended decision that I made was I was full of so much shame and embarrassment and a little bit of resentment because my son's father, he was sort of in the same boat as me, but we weren't together, and he's a guy, right? So he still got to go to parties and he still got to do all this cool stuff and really decide what he wanted to do with his life, when a lot of decisions were made for me the second that I chose to have this child. So that was one thing. And then with all that shame and resentment and embarrassment, I got married really early. And to me, it was like, oh, well, if I had a husband, nobody would ask all these questions. And it just, for some reason, felt like it would, I don't know if I would say lighten the load, but it just felt so much more socially acceptable to be married with a child, even if the child was from a previous relationship. So I got married really young. I mean, I think I was 22, maybe. I had 2 people in high school that I dated, and one of them I had a child with, and the second one I married. So those were like my only 2 relationships until I got divorced at 26. And so at that point I had had a second son. And then I was a single mom for, God, like a decade before my current husband and I married. We've been married about 10 years now. So I have experienced parenthood as a teenager. I've experienced parenthood, a single mom, 2 kids, 2 different dads is how I spent the majority of my 20s and early 30s. And all I wanted to do when I was a kid was move out of my small town. And once I decided to have a child, I couldn't do that. Once I got divorced and had 2 kids, I couldn't do that. So I never got to really move away. And then I really wanted to be, my dream job was I really wanted to be a psychologist, and I couldn't do that because I did eventually get my bachelor's degree. It took me about 10 years, well, longer. I didn't get that till I was about 31. I immediately got my master's degree. But I didn't have the time, money, or anything to get my PhD in psychology because it took twice as long as public policy, which I ended up getting it in. So anyways, every decision along the way was based on, can I afford to do this with my kids? Because, as a woman, you're always giving up something. You're giving up family time, you're giving up work time, you're giving up personal time. And it wasn't in the cards for me. So here we are. Now I'm in my mid 40s. I am finally finishing my PhD, but for the first time, my youngest moved out. December was 1 year ago. So I've been sort of child free. You're never really child free, I guess, but for a year, for the first time in my life, which is crazy.
Wow. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Like, my kids are 13, 16, and 17, and they are in no way prepared to be parents. In fact, I'm that parent who's real easy with the conversations about sex and all of it. So I'll make jokes. My little boy is 13 and he has a girlfriend. Like, he's the only one of my 3 kids who's ever dated so far. And I'm like, you're kind of too young for this, but just remember that if you're not ready to be a parent, you're not ready to move beyond that kiss. So, and he's like, Mom.
Yeah, I have the same way. My parents were very, I don't want to say we were very religious. My parents had a really good time with their friends and that kind of stuff. But we went to church every Sunday. And, but their philosophy was just, you do not have sex until you get married. It's not a choice. It's not a conversation. It's not,
Right.
You can do it, but choose not to. It's like, you just don't. And so I was never really talked to about that. And they were very, like, I was not allowed to watch PG-13 movies until I was 13. I wasn't allowed to watch rated R movies. And yes, do the math, until I was 17. So I didn't learn a lot from TV. Obviously, the internet didn't exist.
Right.
And so when I found myself pregnant, I was more surprised than anybody. I'll tell you that.
Well, and that's huge, because obviously there was a gap in your parents' job, sorry, Mom and Dad, in educating you around sex, around being an adult or being a child, around, my mom was the same. So, I mean, the show Spirit Cafe was founded on 2 recovering Catholics, right? Who got together to talk about spirituality without the guilt or dogma of religion. And since my co-host departed, I've focused more on conversations to perk up your soul. And yet still, the religious and spirituality aspects are a foundation for us. So my mom was also that mom who just repeatedly told me that I couldn't have sex before I was married, and that I should just stay a virgin, and would ask me, are you still a virgin? Because it's a sin to have sex.
Straight to hell, right? Straight to hell.
Right,
Yeah,
straight to hell. So what happened for you, if you don't mind answering, and if I'm like going to, because I tend to go a little bit deep into what's interesting. Perfect, thank you. So what happened when you found yourself pregnant? Surprise, surprise, this is how it's done. And I've got to tell my parents, like, what was happening for 15-year-old Leslie?
So I'm going to say a pretty good kid. My grades were really struggling at this point. I was in the 10th grade. I just started 10th grade. We started high school in 8th grade, 8th, 9th grade, grades kind of all over the place. But other than that, I mean, I was a cheerleader and I played basketball and I had always done ballet and, whatever. I was a really active kid. I don't think that my parents had the slightest inclination that sex was even on the radar. So I now had to tell them that I was pregnant, and I was pretty sure that they would have bet their lives that I had never so much as pecked a boy on the mouth, right? Like, not even like family kiss style, and it was really difficult. I had a friend whose mom had her when she was not married, 17, similar situation.
Okay.
She just happened to be one of my good friends. I go after school to her house to take this pregnancy test. Lo and behold, it's positive. So this mom, who I later learned, she felt like this was her karma, because when she found out she was pregnant in the same situation, she ran away.
Oh, wow.
And she felt like it was her karma that I was there, and that she now had to do all the things she should have done the first time. So she puts me and my friend in her car. She drives me home. This is after school, right? So this is like a Tuesday or something. Pulls up at my house, goes inside and tells my mom that I need to sit down and talk to her, and that she should probably get my dad in the room. And we have like this detached garage, right? So I watch my dad, because I'm sitting in the car, and he walks like in front of the car and like up to the house, and I watch him go in this room, and I'm immobile, right? Like, oh, my whole body is like vibrating, and I don't know what to say or whatever. I really don't even remember walking into the door. But by the time I come to the front door, the other mom actually told my mom, because I have two little sisters. She said, why don't you let me take your two daughters and let you talk to Leslie? So she takes my two little sisters and leaves, thank God, so that we had the house to ourselves. And my parents are in the living room, right? And the living room is where you never go. You never go.
Oh, the fancy
The
living
couch.
room, the room
Yeah,
that's never,
not the
never.
room we hang out in and watch TV. This is like the second
Right.
one where
Right.
the couch is white and you're not allowed to sit on it. And
Exactly.
the formal living room. And I always say, and I just wrote about this in my book, it's like from the time that I entered the front door until I made it into the living room, I was carried. Like, I have no explanation from how I got from point A to point B. It was an out-of-body experience. And the second that I hit the room where they were, I collapsed on the floor and I just started crying. And I guess an important part of the story is her mom, the other mom, told my mom,
Okay.
Leslie needs to talk to you. She's pregnant. And my mom, God bless her, looked at this woman and said, are you sure it's not your daughter? Like that. Like, so anyway, this woman was a really good sport. So my mom doesn't believe that it's true, but this woman has just told her this. So I hit the floor, I'm crying. My dad is pacing and, borderline yelling, exactly what you'd expect of dad. And my mom is crying on the couch, and it was awful. So I was wholeheartedly believed that they were going to kick me out and I was going to lose my whole family. Like, of course, I've at this point known that I'm pregnant for maybe an hour. So my thought process is not exactly clear, but, they went through all the normal parent stuff. Like, oh, well, you got to marry the guy. And I'm like, I'm 15.
Right.
And again, I'm not even, he had been a boyfriend. I didn't know I was pregnant until I was like 7 or 8 weeks pregnant. And the one time that we had sex was so traumatic that we immediately broke up. I didn't want anything to do with him. So I hadn't even dated this guy in, 6 weeks or something. I don't remember the math, but it was a while. We were not together. He was not my serious boyfriend. I did not love him. I did not want to marry him. But they were like, well, that's what you do. My dad was Catholic, and he was like, well, you get married. And I just was like, no. And thank God I pushed back on that.
Yes.
And they were eventually like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, let's not.
Right. Like, it's not the 50s, mom and dad.
Yeah, they came around to that. That was definitely their first instinct. And from there, it was a whirlwind of just things. I tried to go to school the next day. That was stupid. My mom took me to, a gynecologist to confirm that it was true. My first experience going to the gynecologist is when I know that I'm pregnant. They put me in this room. The gynecologist is one who should have at that point retired. So he's in his 70s. I'm 15,
God.
15. And I know that he's nervous about me being a child. At least looking back, I can figure this out because I've never been before, right? You don't know what's normal. He puts me in this room. So it's him, my mom, and like 4 nurses. So I'm laying on that horrible table with my feet in stirrups. And mind you, my sexual experience at this point tops 2 seconds. I kid you not. I can go into all those details. It's in my book. But no one has seen me naked like this. Lying there with my legs open for this doctor to look in it had the same feelings of like being raped, right? Like I'm on display and they're putting things in me.
It is so violating. Yeah.
And I was so violating. So honestly, that one moment at the doctor was one of the most traumatizing moments of the entire ordeal. Wow. But my mom took me to her doctor. She had seen him and my aunts went there and they'd been going to him for years. And obviously that's the first person she should have reached out to. And she didn't know he was going to handle it like that. But it was just a nightmare. And then from that point forward, dealing with absolutely everything, obviously, was different.
Right.
Mhm.
Wow. Wow. That's a lot of trauma for one little girl.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, still getting over that,
Yeah.
it was, I just, but one of the things that, everybody tried to tell me then, I had another good friend of mine's mom who really tried to talk to me about adoption. And or she tried to talk to me about abortion. And then I had my preacher at the time, he had adopted his children. So he came over to talk to us about adoption. So like everybody tried to talk to us about options. Um, I didn't really understand what abortion was. I had obviously never been educated on that. What little I did know about abortion, I was very, very, I didn't understand. I was doing what I was told, right? It was very pro-life.
Right.
And then all of a sudden I was like, oh,
Right.
but
That's
I
what that
still didn't,
means.
right. But I
Yeah.
still didn't understand all of that until I never thought it was an option for me. I didn't decide not to have an abortion. I never knew that was an option. I didn't
Right.
understand that I was someone who could have made that decision.
Well, and I wouldn't imagine that your dad, being very Catholic, would have
They
thought,
never brought it up to me.
yeah.
They never said this is something we can do. I mean, and that's kind of like sort of knew. I just didn't know enough about it to know that I could have put my foot down and had one. I just didn't know.
Mhm.
Um, and to me, adoption was like, well, the embarrassing part is that I'm 15 and then I'm pregnant and I'm going to have a kid. Giving the baby up for adoption, I'm already through all of that.
Right.
That's happening one way or the other. And then I just, I was a child and I thought, I believed, I mean, I was religious and I thought, God wants me to do this. I mean,
Well, and
I
you
did
did it.
not, I remember watching my prayers, right? And I didn't pray
Yeah.
to God, please don't let this happen to me. But it was, if this is what you feel like I have to do, please help me get through it. Which
Right.
was, the God I believe in now doesn't make 15-year-old girls pregnant. I can tell you that. But at that time, that's the way that I viewed it. Everything happens for a reason, right? So
Mhm.
God must have bestowed this upon me for some reason. And it took me a very long time to get past that.
And so were your parents, did they support you then and kind of,
Always,
okay,
I
awesome.
won the parent lottery. It was a huge adjustment. It was not easy. We still fought about a lot of things. And mind you, I'm the oldest. My middle sister is special needs. And then my youngest sister is 5 years younger than me. So while this is happening, they have an 11-year-old
Right.
and a special needs daughter whose mentality is way younger than that.
Mhm.
And so they were trying to raise their other kids. And then I bring this, I had a boy, obviously. So
Mhm.
3 daughters. And then I bring this boy into the house. And it was just a couple of years of my mom helped me at first, and then her babysitting didn't help our relationship. So I ended up getting a babysitter outside of the house so I could go to high school because it just made more sense. It was hard.
Yeah, I
Really
can
hard.
only imagine, only imagine. Wow. And so you got through it, then you get married and you're 22 years old.
So dumb, right? So dumb. But this was the guy
I
that I
mean,
was
people,
like,
even without babies, do it. And yeah, I do think of that. It's even my kids are like, that is just too young. That's just dumb.
yeah. I mean, I tell my kids now I'm like 30, but anyways, he was the guy that I had the crush on, that I was quote unquote in love with all through high
Mhm.
school. And when I had actually started talking to him again, like I wouldn't say we were not in a relationship, but we were like talking on the phone every night, when I found out I was pregnant.
Mm.
And he at that point was like, well, I can't date you. Like, you're an embarrassment. Like, I would never bring you home to my family. Like, you have a kid,
Wow.
which I took as a challenge. And I think that's why I married him, just to prove that, just to prove that, you know what, anyway. So I married him. And turns out we had a lot of fun together, but we were not good together.
Okay. Yeah.
Like we laughed a lot and we had the same group of friends and we were around each other. But we just weren't good together. We didn't make good choices together. And I mean, I got to the back of the church and I immediately realized that with no one around, right? Because everybody that we know is in this church. And as soon as we exit and we get to the back of the church and it's like dead silence and it's just us. And I'm like, oh crap. He's not, you know what I mean? I knew right then. I knew right then.
Mhm.
So we were married for less than 4 years.
Okay. Okay. So, but you had another child with him.
I did.
And so now let's get into this co-parenting conversation because I find it so interesting, co-parenting after divorce, which I've been divorced now for, gosh, what year is it? Well, I left 9 years ago and we've been divorced 7 years. And co-parenting sounds like a nice word, but it hasn't actually, yeah, we have 50-50 custody, but we haven't ever really co-parented because until our middle child came out as trans and suddenly he's talking
Wow.
to me
Yeah.
just this past 6 months or so. But before that, it was just like we speak through our family wizard, court appointed communication, because he's just not civil in his communication. And so and I destroyed his family and his life and and so like co-parenting, when I see divorced parents who actually cooperate and work together and can talk or show up at the same events and laugh together, I'm just like, oh God, like that's a fairy tale to me.
Yeah. Well, my parents were married for 45 years when my dad died. And so I was not raised in a divorced family.
Hey, my parents have been married 58 years. So yeah.
And I mean, all my aunts and uncles, like, like this just wasn't really something that I knew anything about. So my oldest son, so my high school boyfriend, or the guy that I had a baby with in high school, he and I we tried to make it work a couple of times. But in the end, we got engaged. And then I broke off the engagement 30 days before our wedding. And from that point forward, and even up until that point, co-parenting was horrendous. Like at some point I had gone to court. He wasn't allowed to see my son without his mom being there. It was just absolutely horrendous. And then for whatever reason, so him and the guy I married hated each other, of course. Okay. Right. So once I get divorced, the first one, all of a sudden we're friends. And since the day I told him that I was getting divorced, he and I have been great co-parents. So first 10 years of raising a child from 15 to 25, hell. And then all of a sudden I'm getting divorced and he's like, cool. And we've been friends ever since. Like, wow. He remarried, his wife and I don't get along. I'm not going to pretend like we have the most fantastic co-parenting relationship. But let me tell you, after that, we made it work and it was so much better. And also up until that point, I had full custody and he was doing weekends. And then we slowly went from weekends to like an additional week during the summer. And then around the time I got divorced, my husband and I immediately went to 50-50. And so once I started doing 50-50 with my youngest, my other, so confusing, right? My older son's dad says, you're doing 50-50 with him. We would really like to try that. And I said, yes. Okay. So I started doing 50-50 with both of them. And at that point, for the first time, they were both on the same schedule. And we actually had to go to court, and the judge, because I was getting child support, and we were like, we want to stop child support and we want to go to 50-50. And the judge was just like, well, never seen that before. And so that was kind of funny. But so at that point I had them on the same time. But when my husband and I split, we tried 50-50, but at first we were like 2 days on, 2 days off, weekend. We did all these different 50-50 scenarios until finally I said, we need to get to the point where we're splitting on date. Like, so we ended up with, like, I would put my son on the bus Monday morning, and then he would get him off the bus Monday afternoon, so that we didn't even have to meet anywhere, because originally we were doing Sundays and my Sundays were shot. Like, I would wake up so full of anxiety knowing that I had to see him and where are we going to meet. And I mean, it was a nightmare. So it took us a little while to find our co-parenting groove. And then of course I think maybe he just now, 20 years later, he pretty much doesn't hate me anymore. But we are definitely at the height of our co-parenting just now. Like, I'm talking in the past 6 months, I have talked to my ex-husband more productively, nicer, and everything more than we have ever in the past. Wow. And I don't know why that is, but that's where we are. So it was just, I eventually hire my own career coach, because I don't want to know what I want to do, what my passion is in life. Mm-hmm. And I look back and I'm like, I have done co-parenting all the wrong ways, right? Not to mention I've got 2 kids with 2 different dads, which means I've got twice the co-parenting experience. Right. As everyone else. And I was like, I've done it through the court system. I've done it with lawyers. I've done it without that. I've done weekends. I've done it, And so I was like, God, doing things the hard way is how I learn everything, it feels like. But I was like, I really want to save somebody else from that. And so I was thankfully have been able to take all of that experience and been able to help other people co-parent better.
Mm.
Parenting, I don't think is ever easy. I see these cool families on TikTok, you know, and they're like, I'm the mom and I'm the stepmom and we love our kid. And I'm like, great. I'm so happy. That is what I aspired to be. But I
Right.
think
And
that's
how
a
real
rare
is
gem.
it? Right. Because also it's social media
It's a
and
rare gem if it's true. Definitely.
right. And I mean, I have some friends who have decent experiences with that, but it doesn't seem like it's the norm. So it's a surprise when it works really easily. And it seems like it takes the kids getting much older.
I mean, I think that helps for sure. And like I said, now that my youngest son is 20, he'll be 21 this year. He's been going through a rough 6 months and we've really been working together. It's like I get off the phone with him and I tell my current husband, I'm like, I just talked to him and like we didn't yell. We made action plans. Like we had productive conversation, not just conversation where we said this is what needs to happen, this is what we're going to do. We worked through it together. And and to his credit, he was like, did you tell him that? And I was like, yeah, I told him that. Like I made sure I said thank you so much for this conversation, this has
Yes.
really been helpful. And so that was great. But I mean, it did. Co-parenting is really hard. And then one thing that I always bring up when I'm talking about co-parenting is that my mom one time looked at me and she goes, do you think that, I can't remember how she worded it. She said single parents or whatever. She's like, do you think that you're the only one who fight about how to raise your kids? She's like, that's what married people fight about too. She's like, and she made me realize that even when you're married, when you're happily married, you're still co-parenting.
Right.
Even if one of the parents is deceased, you're still co-parenting because you're still having to take on and try to find other people to replace what's missing. Like maybe you let your kids spend more time with your brother, or you know what I mean? Like co-parenting is the only parenting.
Right. I love that. I love that you said that because I have joked over the last 8 to 9 years that my mom is the best co-parenting partner, right? Like she's a much better grandma than she was a mom, right? Like there's no impatience there. There's just absolutely, yes, I can help. Yes, I'll be there for my grandkids. Yes, yes, yes. Whereas when I was a kid, it was like, no, no, no.
Nobody knows. I feel
And
that.
she's an amazing grandma. And I am so grateful for her. And then I sometimes joke that my middle is actually my wife, right? Like, well, until he came out as a boy. But so now I'm like, wait, I can't call you my wife anymore because he'll make dinner. He'll make pizza from scratch. He'll make muffins and biscuits and cookies for everybody. And it's like, oh God, it's so helpful to have someone, and not my oldest, who I can say, hey, I'm going to be gone for dinner or I have to work or whatnot. Can you make sure everybody eats? My
That's
oldest
nice.
is like, well, I'm the oldest. I should be in charge. And it's like, okay, well, you're in charge of making sure things get done, but this is the person that I'm counting on to make sure everyone eats, turn off the oven, and I come home to a clean kitchen.
Yeah, which is something else my mom taught me, which is each child is unique, right? So
Yes.
I always wanted it to be fair, and that really doesn't exist in raising kids. My two kids are night and day, and what works for one doesn't work for the other, And so
Yeah.
I am a completely different mom to these two different kids. They're both
Right.
boys. They're 8 years apart.
Yeah.
And obviously just based on age, I was a different mom anyways. But
Sure.
but yeah, different kids need different things, and to me, in co-parenting, it ebbs and flows like everything else. So there were periods where I was what my son needed more than his dad, but there were a lot of times where he needed his dad more than he needed me.
Mhm.
And as a parent, I think it's sometimes you want to be the all, right? Like I want to be the A+ mom and I want to do
Right.
all the dad stuff and I want to be everything all the time to my kid that he needs. And you just can't be. And there are things that I just couldn't do. And part of being a human and part of the whole experience is learning, and part of learning is learning that your parents aren't perfect, and learning I want to do with you grow up into an adult and you're like, what, my parents did this and I loved it, my parents did this and I hated it, and thank God that I was able to make those distinctions. That's what it's all about.
Right.
And so you have to let your kids get hurt by their other parent in order for them to understand what's important and what kind of parent they want to be one day. So it's not my job to protect them from being hurt or disappointed in their other parent. It's my job to encourage the situation. Like, I encourage you, you have to go spend time with your dad.
Yes.
You need to do this, and I've always tried to be like, you know, hey, well, I don't know their anniversary, but like, hey, don't forget your dad's birthday's coming up, make
Same.
sure you call him or get him a gift or their
Yeah.
anniversary, or, like, I've always tried to really encourage the relationship between them and their dads.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that either of them encourage that relationship with me, but that's not what it's about, right? It's about,
Exactly.
I want to look back and say, I did everything I could to be a catalyst to a healthy father-son relationship.
Same. That is one thing that has always been important to me, especially knowing that they're not having that experience at their dad's house. Like, he is talking crap about me. He is talking crap about society. He's French, so this is what they do. The culture, everything else. And so when they come to me and they're in my space, I want them to know that they can bring all their feelings with them. They can say anything they need to. And I'm still going to encourage them to have a relationship with their other parent. And I'm still going to encourage them to see the best parts of him.
Yes.
And I'm still going to encourage them to try, because and that they can say anything they want, and that I won't say crap about their dad, especially when they were little. Now I can commiserate with them. And I know, honey, like, I hear
Yes.
you. But, when they were younger, I never wanted my children to feel like they were born of anything but love, anything but love. And I think that's so vital that they know that they're a whole person, and whether they were really born of love or it just happened, surprise,
Mhm.
that they're born of your love,
Yeah.
right? Born
Yes.
of
And
your love.
that's kind of what I've always tried to encourage them is like, even if they don't get it on the other side, I want them to feel safe with me, right? Because
Yes,
I think one thing that parents miss is if I go to my son and I talk bad about his father, I'm talking bad about him.
exactly.
It's not two different things, right?
Right.
His
They
father
come from
has
that
his family
person.
and they come from the same thing. So when they talk bad about me, they're talking bad to my son about my son.
Right.
And that's something that my son is going to have to learn how to deal with in their own minds, right? And how they're going to interpret that and deal with it. But I don't want them to ever get that from me.
Right.
I mean, I won't say anything. I've been a brokenhearted woman many times. I've said many bad things about both of their dads, but not to them.
Right.
Not to them, and not in any way that I thought would harm them.
Mhm.
And that's always what I say. My number one co-parenting thing is never, ever, ever talk bad about the other parent to your child, ever.
Yeah. I'm not even a co-parenting coach or a divorce coach, and that is my number one rule as well. So when did you start to get into coaching then? Like, what was that path?
So it was early in 2021, and I had started my PhD and I was flipping houses. And so, I mean, even by starting my PhD, I knew that flipping houses wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my
Mhm.
life. And so I was kind of trying to figure out what was next, but I really wasn't sure at that point. And like I said, I hired a career coach and I just said, look, and then I realized what really has always, even when I used to want to be a psychologist or a therapist, like I wanted to do that because I genuinely enjoy conversation. I genuinely enjoy communication, and I like helping people. I nothing makes me happier than when somebody says, "Oh my gosh, great idea. You're right. I'm going to reword this angry rage text so that I don't start a fight and just say thank you." Or you know what I mean? Like I like having an impact on people's lives in that way, which I think trickles down to their kids too. And it makes me feel good that all of that pain and misery that I went through can somehow be switched around and flipped or whatever you want to call it to now be something good.
Right.
And I hadn't thought of I honestly, it's funny. I didn't even know that a divorce coach or a co-parenting coach was a thing. I thought I made it up. I thought
Mhm.
that I was going to be the first one in the whole world. And then I was quickly, after doing a little bit of research, I realized, no, this is already a thing. But it's not a big thing where I am in Virginia here. But anyways, I just all of a sudden realized that's what I wanted to do. And I just started going through coaching training for a long time. And then, I started immediately.
That's so, so good. I think it's so important. I considered it, but that's not where I want to spend my mind space time. So, but I do work with a ton of divorced people and parents and single parents. And, people need help navigating. It's so hard and it's so emotional. And there's so much happening. So, what's your typical client? Like, who do you love to work with?
It's so funny. When I started, I just sort of assumed I would end up with women, but I've actually had more male clients than female clients. Um, but my female clients tend to be getting divorced, and my male clients tend to be more co-parenting,
Okay.
meaning that they've already been divorced for a year or two.
Mhm.
There's no custody battle at this point, but it's
Right.
just like, I'm a co-parent and I need help knowing how to do this. There's usually still a huge communication block between the two parents. Um, so I'm not sure. I enjoy working with the men just because it's really cool to see. A lot of times they'll be like, yeah, like, I'm so glad you're a woman. I would have never thought of it like that. And so that feels really
Mhm.
impactful. But I also really like being there for the women through the divorce, because I know that in hindsight, had I had some kind of a coach going through my divorce, it would have been a totally different experience.
Mhm.
Totally. I would have saved years of heartache if I'd have had somebody there holding my hand in my corner. Because when I got divorced, it was equally as traumatic as having a baby at 15, because nobody got divorced, right? I lost
Right.
all of my friends. Well, let me say this. I got divorced when I left my husband. I moved on very quickly. So nobody wanted to be around me. I was accused of having an affair. I was accused of being all the good female slanders. I was a whore. I was a cheat, like, I mean, just all this horribleness. And I was in this tiny town, and nobody cared what the truth was, of course.
Right.
And the rumors were just flying, and it was just horrendous. And I ended up like moving and making new friends. And I literally started over from scratch. Um, Almost exactly 10 years after I had had a baby in high school. And that was kind of it was just horrible. But the point is, if I had a coach, I would have been able to handle the entire situation better. And
Mhm.
I'm happy that I get to do that now for other people. But it's funny that it's two totally, usually the women are going through divorce and usually the men are co-parenting clients.
That's so interesting. And I love to, you mentioned like responding to the ex. I had a really good core group of girlfriends, one of whom was my lawyer. And so every time at the beginning that I needed to respond to something, I was still caught up in those addictive, because mine was a very toxic relationship, but very emotionally abusive. And so, I would get caught up in the emotion. And so I just started sending it to my three best girlfriends, all like in a group text. Okay, here's his message. Here's how I want to respond. And they would be like, all right, Tam, take this out, this out, this out. Let's break this down. And eventually my pause button just got so big. And I have this idea for a book of my own in my head, which is what I wanted to say, what I said.
Mhm. Yes.
Like get all those thoughts out because they're there, then that's okay. Like get them out, but don't send them.
That's
Go
what I
back.
always say. I always say type an email. And I say,
Yeah.
but don't even think about putting the name in the
Yeah.
to
Never
box,
put the
right?
name.
Never put the name, because you don't want to accidentally sneeze or something, and then boom, you hit send, and now your life's a nightmare.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
that's a lot of what I do. Is my clients will say, exactly that. I got this, and this is what I want to say. And it's easier over email, and I'll say, take this out, add this, but we do text messaging too. And even just that, like you said, just
So
small
helpful.
little tweaks, right? Or I'll say, this mostly feels like anger. Why don't you add something in and thank him for, taking your daughter to the doctor last week, and just, say that seemed to have worked out really well, or thank him for the extra 30 minutes he gave you, or whatever. Like, come up with something and like say something nice when you're asking for something, you know what I mean? And we just
Yes.
really try to change that communication. And I mean, I think it helps. It certainly helped with me, and I've seen it work with my clients.
Mhm.
It is so nice, and you're lucky that you had that group of people. I had a group of people too, a solid a couple friends, but we were so young. None of us had been through anything like that
Right.
before. We
Right.
didn't know what we were doing.
You didn't have the
I
wisdom of
wish I'd have
age
known that
yet.
coaching was a thing. Huh?
So you didn't have the wisdom of age yet.
No, I had no wisdom at all at that point, except for the wisdom where I knew I was in a bad situation and I needed to get out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm glad I figured that out, but I definitely would have been better off with a coach. I mean, I'm just like, I mean, I am a divorce and co-parenting coach, but I have a career coach. Every time somebody's like, I don't know how to do this, I'm like, what you should do? You should find a coach. Like,
I know. I
coaches
always
are life
mention like
changing.
coaches need coaches. I have a business coach, right? We need
Yes.
coaches. And it's so wonderful to have somebody who can guide you and who you can bounce things off of and who can fill in gaps for you that you don't have. We all want to be better at life, and
Mhm.
coaches help us do that in whatever area we need it.
Yeah.
So I love it. I love it. Um, you do have the question on your question list, like what would you tell people how a divorce coach is different from a therapist?
Ooh, I like that one. So the way that I describe it is that your therapist works with you to sort of look at your past, really evaluate your trauma. How is that impacting your life up until now? So it's more like from now back,
Yeah.
right? Your past, your parents, your past relationships. And a coach, in my opinion, not that we don't ever talk about that, but the majority of what we do starts today and looks in the future. Where do you want to be after your divorce? Where do you want to be when your kids are grown up? Where do you want to be? And then we set those goals and we try to stick to that, which helps a lot. Like I'm like, okay, well, we talked about how you want to look back on your divorce. Is the way that you're getting ready, is what you're getting ready to say in that email supportive of that? You
I
know, it
love
really
that.
helps. And with that communication is like, does this align with who you want to be when this divorce is over? Does this align with how you want to tell your kids things went when they ask you when they're going through a divorce? You know what I mean? And so like that is really helpful. So I always say like a coach helps you create the future that you want, and a therapist helps you get better from the past, basically.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. I love that. So good. I just had somebody inquire about coaching with me, and he was, here's my backstory, blah, 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 blah. And I responded and I said, you know what, just let's book a call. I don't need your backstory because we're going to focus forward. We're going to
Yes.
create your life now, from now, not back. And yeah, it comes up, but I don't need any of that. All I need to know is what you want to begin creating now in this moment. So let's move forward together. So that's such a great distinction, and I love it. I think what you do is so awesome and so necessary. And anybody who is even thinking about divorce,
Yeah.
especially if you have kids, like call us right now.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I would say like when we go back to you said you had your group of friends and I had my group of friends. I'm like, your friends are always biased because they know your husband or they know your spouse and they know your kids, right?
Yeah.
So they are always a little bit concerned about your kids, and not that I'm not concerned about your kids, but like literally my focus in life is you and your kids being okay is a part of that, obviously.
Yes.
I'm like, but I don't know your husband. I don't know your kids. I don't know anybody involved. And like eventually, not only are your friends biased, but eventually they're going to get tired of you calling in the middle of the day when you're crying because you thought you were going for 50-50 and you just got a letter in the mail that got delivered and says that your husband's fighting for full custody. Like when you have those breakdowns, that's when you need a divorce coach, right?
Yeah, that is helpful.
Walk you off the ledge and get you sort of relaxed and calm and thinking clearly so that when you go back to talk to your lawyer, you're not paying your lawyer for those freakouts and those million questions. You're showing up with your lawyer and you've got a list and you're like, okay, I'd like to end up with the house. I want this much of income. I want blah, blah, blah. And you already know all those things. So you actually save money on the lawyer side, in my opinion.
Yeah, I always had to make very clear distinctions. Like, I'm calling you as a friend right now.
Yes.
Or I need lawyerly advice.
You gotta be when you've got those dual relationships like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, it's so important to have some really clear and firm boundaries on both sides. So I love that. Gosh, what else? So what is the one thing that you want people to know if they are navigating any aspect of this kind of situation?
I mean, if it's not me, I highly encourage them to find a different coach. There's a whole website out there, Certified Divorce Coach, and it's just divorce coaches. You can research all of them. And I say this too, coaches are like anything else, right? We come in all different shapes and sizes, meaning that you can find one, I'm pretty sure, that fits your budget. Everybody charges something different. So if you start talking to a coach and you don't like them, just talk to another coach. Most coaches do, free calls at first. It's not always a fit at first, but, find somebody. Find a co-parenting coach. No matter what you're going through, find a coach that will help you get through it. I promise it's worth every penny. It'll save you so much time and heartache. That's my encouragement. I obviously send people to my website, but there's lots
and
of
you can do that now. Send people to your website. What's your website and where do we find you and where do you show up on social media?
Sure. Leslie Hope Coaching. And if you want to read more about my story, Not Mary, Not Roe, the survival story of a reluctant teen mom, is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you buy books. It was published in September, and it's a lot more about me finding out I'm pregnant and how I dealt with that. But anyway, that's it. I'm on Instagram at Leslie Hope Holthoff, and I'm also on Facebook, Leslie Hope Coaching. And feel free to reach out via email or instant message or anything, and I'm happy to start a conversation.
Awesome. I so appreciate your time. This has been like This is a hot topic for me, obviously, as a woman who is divorced with kids and has done the single mom thing forever. Well, not forever, but for a long time now. And I just appreciate your wisdom and the vulnerability in sharing that story. Because boy, if I were to hire a divorce coach or a co-parenting coach, I would definitely refer my ex-husband to you. Because you've been through it. So I always appreciate the life experience as well as the knowledge, that we learn from books and teachers. So thank you so much for being here on Spirit Cafe. It's been fun. This is the kind of thing I think of as fun, which is weird for some people.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. All right. I'm just going to say goodbye to our audience. Thank you for being here. I, of course, want to hear your questions or read your questions and your comments. So please give us some love wherever you're listening, or if you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, and then leave us a comment and let us know what you think. And then if you know someone who's going through, or might be soon, a similar experience to what Leslie works with, then reach out, ask your questions, or direct them to this podcast episode, because you never know who you might help by simply sharing. Thank you, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us on Spirit Cafe. Please leave all comments on our Spirit Cafe Facebook page or in the comments below our YouTube videos.